we had scheduled for late summer. Ours is a 2-day event, 1.5 days or so. We have a prior evening social and a reverse trade show the day before, and we have our social is actually in the conventional trade show, conventional expo on that prior evening, and that's a big money event. And then the next day is when we have all of our breakouts and the keynote and those kinds of things. So you can just kind of see the general scope of our typical conference. So it's a day and a half. And it's a big deal for our chapter in terms of the budgeting. So this year we had budgeted for a net surplus of $59,700. And that's a critical piece of our annual budget, as you can imagine. So in terms of the participants and the elements, we have generally 75 to 80 booths. We budgeted for 75. We have 275 registrants. And for us, that is overwhelmingly managers for these events. We have other events where we tend to have board members, but for this one it is, excuse me, mostly managers. And then we have lots of exhibitor participants, and we do make money off of those. And we'll talk a little bit about the money element later in the business models, but we allow one exhibitor per booth, and then we charge for all the additional team members, whether they're coming on Thursday or Friday, and that kind of thing. So that has worked out well. Then, as for all of you, the world comes apart, and so we happen to be at 100 days out when our board just flat out looked ahead and said, we can always change our mind later, but right now we need to plan as if we're going to have no more in-person events for 2020. And I know that I shared that information with some of you and with some people that I work with in other organizations, and they were floored. But as it has turned out, that was very forward thinking of our board, and it freed Amy and me to not have to think about a dual path. And that was huge for us. But we did have enough sense at that point to think, all right, if we're going to salvage anything, we can always salvage lunch and learns. That can be kind of dry webinars if we need it to be. But for virtual conference, we need to start looking for some big stuff. And so at 90 days out, the board actually said, okay, full steam ahead, go for it. We had begun talking to them about some platforms that had come up, but even at 90 days out, we had not firmed up a platform. And then at 75 days out, we went back to the board and said, okay, we've done it, we've pulled the trigger. And I'm saying that very carefully, because what you're not hearing there is the board making us come back to them repeatedly to check in. We did check in and kept, of course, our leadership engaged, but their green lights were critical. And so I know that we all have different boards at different times in our lives, and I don't know if there's going to be board leaders looking at this Friday afternoon event or the recording, but whoever you are, it is critical when you're on a fast track like this and when everybody is scrambling to find the sweet spot between keeping the board informed and in the know on what you know, getting their support for, okay, here's the parameters you have laid out for us, staff. Here's best case, here's worst case, here's a likelihood, you go forth. And that is really, really important. And we enjoyed that support throughout. And it was very smart on their part and life-saving on our part, because quite honestly, if we didn't have the leadership structure that we happen to have this year in place, and if Amy was not on our staff, I would have said, sorry, I don't see this in our future right now. We're going to have to really kick it back and think. But instead, we were able to go the other way and go full steam ahead. I will confess that some of this was a little bit maybe naivete on Amy's and my part, because we just assumed, well, of course there's something out there. It's just going to be a matter of finding it. Of course there's going to be something out there that has all the elements that we want and we need. And as it turned out, that was not necessarily a correct assumption in terms of what we found out could be coming up. So in terms of where we ended up, then just to give you a sneak peek at this side, we ended up attaining about 90% of that budgeted net surplus. So remember, it was about $60,000. So we ended up well north of $50,000 for at the end of the day. And then for our attendees, we brought in about 82% of our budgeted total I'm going to use the term managers, even though it's attendees, because they were overwhelmingly managers. And then just a quick look at on the front side of this on what was their initial feedback. So we'll talk a little bit more about feedback later, but this was kind of an early barometer for us. So just to put that into a little bit of perspective, we are classified as an extra large chapter, and I'm not sure where that cutoff is, but it's been that way ever since my time here. So we serve that group across all of North Carolina, which is challenging sometimes geographically, but the conference is the one thing where we really pull from all over the state. And so it is a key event, not just from a money standpoint, but from a membership, loyalty and engagement and feeling of belonging standpoint. So we were keenly aware of that. And so that was something we wanted to also try to fulfill. So it's Amy and me are the staff basically. And Amy is 20, 30 hours a week. And so then we pulled in, so I'm saying 2 FTEs because we do outsource some database maintenance and bookkeeping. But I'm telling you this on the front end to say you can do this. Even if you're a very small staff, it is doable. The only outside help we brought in was one day, each day of the conference for a specific role that I will share in a little bit. And then as far as other resources, just to put it in perspective on this front end, is that Hopin cost $99 per organizer per month. We floated along with me as the only organizer until the month of, when we had to pay 2 other $99 is for 2 other people to help run the event. So we have $1,000 in the event. So we'll talk a little bit more about that affordability issue and how all that works. And so I want to kind of turn it over now to let Amy speak a little bit about how some of all that comes together. And let me just catch up with myself here on the slides. Yes. Okay, Amy?
Sure. So as Leslie mentioned, we sort of were a little bit naive in the fact that we just assumed that there was a platform that really met all of the needs that we felt like were important if we were going to do a true online conference and expo. Each of the pieces to us was non-negotiable if we were going to pull this off. And so I set out on my merry way to find something that gave us everything we were looking for: a main stage, breakout session rooms, and of course, the biggest piece of the puzzle is that live expo experience. I got pretty quickly discouraged as I started because everything was extremely expensive when you started looking at virtual expos. And I mean, you're talking about, to build these virtual booths, it's like $14,000 as a starting point, and it comes with 5 booths, and every booth after that is, you know, $350. That was just not an option for us. And I'm sure some of you have come across the same thing as you're looking, and that didn't even, you know, that wasn't even in the same platform as the conference. So, so when we were looking, it was finding a platform that had that true main stage, expo, breakout learning session rooms. And I reached out to a friend of mine from college who works in the tech field in Raleigh and asked her, I know that she does a lot of demos with online software, and just asked her if she knew of anything. And she just happened to have sat in on a demo for Hopin. And so we felt like it was the perfect fit after a little bit of digging into it and watching a demo. Some of the things to note about it were that it launched at the end of 2019, but really started to become a thing in January of 2020, so right before all of the COVID stuff hit. So this platform was not built in response to the COVID crisis. It was built specifically for what we're talking about. It was built to meet the needs of people who want to host virtual conferences and expos. So we just thought that that was a really important thing to note, that this is something that they were working on beforehand and building in advance of everything that happened. So it's not like they're playing catch up necessarily all the time. They are continuously improving upon the platform, but they weren't behind the eight ball, so to speak. They really had already planned this out, and it was working well a decent amount of time before we decided to use it for ourselves. So one of the other big things, obviously, was affordability. We know, Leslie touched on the cost of it, but we know that in a nonprofit setting, in particular, cost is always at the forefront of everybody's minds when doing something. We are lucky that we have a board who really trusts us to make those types of decisions, and that Leslie has put us in a place where, okay, you know, it's not the end of the world if we do have to spend a lot of money, but we really would prefer not to have to do that. So the affordability of $99 a month per organizer really made that a very appealing software for us to look at. One of the reasons that it is so affordable is because it's really kind of a DIY business model, and that means that they don't have a ton of support staff available to answer your every question. I mean, we learned the platform really by watching video tutorials and reading the knowledge base that they have online, and those do answer a lot of the questions. And because the software is newer, or at the time it was newer and not as many people had used it, there really weren't even things like chat boards or you know, places that we could go to get other people's quicker answers and feedback. So we had to do a lot of research on our own and watching these tutorials and reading the knowledge base articles as we had questions. We did have a couple of email addresses of people that we could shoot our questions to, but I'm not kidding when I say there were times we didn't get an answer for over a week. So by then, you know, we had figured it out ourselves. So you're gonna, that's just sort of the difference. You pay for what you get, so to speak. So we were sticking with that $99 a month leading up to the conference, but Hopin does have an option to pay a year-long subscription that at the time was $12,000. And we thought, okay, what if we get a month in and we feel like we need to pony up a little bit more, or a lot more really, to get a little more support, make the event more customized. And when I say customized, really it's branding that they're big on. You pay more to get personal branding. And we went ahead and got pre-approval from our board. If we found that we needed to make that happen, they said, yes, spend the $12,000 to get the premium package. But as we went along, we really just felt like it wasn't going to be worth the money to spend that $12,000. And by the time we started really considering it, they had raised the price to $18,000 for the year subscription. So we just did not feel like that would be worth it for just day of support and a little more extra branding, I guess. So they are, I think, working on making more people available to help answer questions, but they are just so flooded with business that I think have gotten a little more than they bargained for. I will say that this is sort of my main focus for those 75 days, 90 days that we had to make this happen. I didn't spend a lot of time on much other stuff. So it does require, I think, to do what you want to do with your conference and to make it the most successful it can be, it will require a lot of time. And I think for us, maybe a little more time than it would somebody else, just because it was so new. And we didn't have anybody to show us the ropes, and we kind of were learning it on our own. So we did have a lot of staff time dedicated to it, but that left Leslie free to focus on some of the business models for conference that would be important to make sure that it was a profitable event. So, so that's sort of the gist of Hopin and why we chose it and how we got there. Leslie, do you have anything to add to that?
Leslie, you're on mute.
Huh. How about now?
You're good.
Okay. I did want to add that Amy is being very generous with her use of the word we. It was Amy. And that is critical, that we were able to look at kind of a division of labor, if you will. And so I want to talk about that for a little bit, because we had 75 days from commit to launch. And so we really focused our division the way you're seeing it here, that Amy focused on one and I focused on the other. But if those of you who are maybe familiar with the design build approach to construction, is you're kind of designing as you go. Well, that's what we were doing. So we're designing and Amy's building, but it wasn't always necessarily in that order, because we were on a fast track. And so what we did know is that while Hopin does attempt to replicate a conference in all its glory and some of its foibles, that, and we'll talk about that a little bit, that we had an opportunity to redesign what we were delivering. And we better think about that hard before we just said, okay, we're going to try to mimic a conference. Because we looked at what perceptions might be going in. So it wasn't just trying to look at it from the board's perspective and working with them and staff perspective. We had to kind of get inside our managers' brains in particular, and think about it that way. Also, the business partners as exhibitors and sponsors. And just, you'll hear me talk about, when we talk about the expo, I'll mention exhibitors, but a lot of times I'll say business partners, because we have, you know, maybe once every other year we'll have a management company exhibit, but pretty much for this chapter, it's business partners who are our exhibitors. But we knew that they wouldn't have any idea what to expect. So we knew that we had to create kind of some new products, if you will, but it was all really in tandem, the chicken and the egg. And so we knew we had an opportunity to reinvent our product, but we also had to figure out, well, what can the software do? And so sometimes it was, we had an idea and then Amy would go away and figure out if the software would do it, despite their claims. You know how that is, you got to actually live it and breathe it to make sure you trust that. But then sometimes Amy would go, hey, I just discovered this really cool feature. So we would turn around and build that into the product promise. So it was very much, you know, a parallel track kind of going on like that. So we had to ask ourselves, as I mentioned, what matters to the primary audience? And so I spoke with management company executives and line managers, and, you know, kind of depending on the life cycle or the career cycle stage for a manager, sometimes they would be on the very early side and say, I haven't even started, you know, my credentialing thoughts yet. Or an exec would say, look, I've got folks who are not even on that track yet. And I've got folks who are PCAMs who, you know, that's not really their primary thing, but everybody in between, yeah, the CEUs are important for them. But for me as the management exec, it's getting that knowledge in their brain, no matter where they are on the spectrum, that's important to us. And so we had to satisfy both of those audiences. And we also knew that convenience was a huge factor, because as I said, we had sat in on some events that were either too fast-paced or too slow-paced from a virtual standpoint. And we tried to find that sweet spot. And then also, how can we build in some fun? And for that, I have to tell you that we were so focused on the mechanics of it that our chapter president had to keep, you know, reminding us and saying, okay, but where's the fun? Where's the fun? So ended up, we were able to build in some of that. And some of that worked really well. Some of it we could have improved on in the way that we did our setup. But and the other side of it is we had to look at what matters to the chapter, because it's great to dream about these things, but unless Amy and I could pull it off, it wasn't going to happen. And so we had to look at, could we afford to do whatever we were thinking about that the software could do? Could we actually manage it on our own? And could we sustain whatever that looked like, you know, in time after the conference? So we kind of started here and said, okay, from inside the manager's brain, they're looking at getting 4 donuts. If you know me very well, it kind of comes back to food. So really, in a typical conference, we would have 12 topics, but they were offered in sessions such that they could only choose sometimes 3 topics and some years 4 topics, depending on how the schedule went. But that was the most they'd be able to come away with, was having set in on 4 topics. So then we thought, okay, but they're not going to get the social, or not, you know, the lack of alcohol. It was very meaningful for some. The lack of a lot of things in their view was meaningful. So we thought, well, you know, how should that affect our price point? And we were hearing about some organizations even making their events free, which we were really not supportive of. And we've had lots of conversations with our board about that over time, is that you want to make your managers value the content, not value the lunch and not value the food and beverage, not value the breakfast stuff, but to value the content. And by lowering the prices, and especially even the concept of doing it for free, despite couching it as a COVID special, which we did, a couple early emergency COVID things, but we were well past that then. So we looked at how do we maintain the valuation of our product. And also I was keenly aware about precedent, because we're all kind of thinking, all right, we can weather this year, what is next year going to look like? And I was also thoughtful of the fact that, quite honestly, I knew the managers already had it in their budget. They already had the travel in their budget. They already had, the time. They already had the hotel. They already had all this. So we knew that it was not a matter of fighting to get it budgeted in 2020, but rather it was a matter of how do we earn that from them. So we thought, well, maybe we can kind of go in the opposite direction. How can we increase the value so that they feel good about sticking with that price point? And so here we were able to see that, all right, because it was virtual, that it brought in an element that we could not have afforded and tried to, frankly, before, couldn't have afforded to pay a videographer to come in and record all these sessions in a nice way. But now all of a sudden they were going to be recorded. So that gave us a lot more flexibility. So we thought, well, okay, how can we, again, flip the model, and instead of thinking about reducing the price, how can we think about maintaining it or even potentially raising it? So we went on to looking at taking basic content and repurposing it in 3 different ways. And this has been a real interesting challenge that involved lots of intense communication and lots of intense cooperation, but mostly for us and for me personally, it took just a whole lot of just thinking time. I had to just spend some time focusing on, all right, how can we make this happen? What is the value? What would be the execution like here? So where we came out was that if we pre-record the sessions, the breakout sessions, then we eliminate the stress from the speakers and the technological quicksand of having them appear live on conference day. So we were strongly on safe ground there, because we knew that was really important. And I called some of our more interesting speakers and that I knew would have potentially issues with that, and just made sure that they felt good about that. So we knew we would have that kind of as our core value. And so at conference, the way that we positioned it is that you get to see that recording. Some of them didn't even know it was recorded until they saw what was the really cool part, which was the speakers themselves started chatting within their own session. I'm typing with my finger, you can maybe see that. But it was really interesting because they would say, we welcome chats during questions during the session, and the speakers would actually type back. And so it really made them feel like they were part of it. And then at the end, we had told them to record 40-minute sessions. At the end of that, then the recording stopped and the presenter came on live with a different set of clothes on. And now they were able to answer the questions verbally. Some of those would be questions that were chatted in. Some of them were questions that were asked then on the chat. So we did not have any live verbal questions, but we did have that function. So in that sense, then we were able to offer the best of both worlds with safety of having a pre-recorded session in case the whole thing blew up, and have the live person on there. Then we looked at adding additional value, and this required some coordination with National. So I reached out to them and said, here's what we're thinking about, is if we have all these recorded and they can only see 4 of them on conference day, then if we allow, as part of their conference registration fee, free access for a limited time in the weeks following conference, and they sign up for those individually, and I track who registers and I track who attends, can that be offered as additional CEUs? And the answer came back as yes. So then we had in our pocket the ability to offer live sessions on conference day, and then we've got something to do afterward. Well, we could have just thrown up on demands, but we thought, let's keep on digging here. And so we came up with the idea that rather than just saying, here's our webinar or our library of 12 recordings, we thought, if we can get the speakers to agree to it, we will ask them to come back and re-attend that original recording again. So we promised the managers that over the a three-week period following conference, that every day we would relaunch or launch a live recording. I say using that term because we would do the original recording, but the presenter was there again in living color to answer their questions. So in that sense, you had 2 opportunities to see each one live. And then within 24 hours after that live launch, we completed the 8th one of those yesterday. Then we convert that to an on-demand. So then they can look at it to their heart's content. Key here, not download it, because we are very aware that the chapters, we all lose money when we offer content in a way that can be freely shared, because then you get one registration fee for a whole community and a whole series of boards and a whole portfolio from a manager. And that's just the way, the way it is, and that's human nature. Nobody's bad or wrong for doing it, but you have to just be smart about how you protect your content in that sense. So we were able to market those 12 donuts instead of 4. Then we thought of a 4th way, which was one of those shower moments, and frankly, I got it rather late in the game, and it made Amy and me scramble even harder. But then we thought, well, wait a minute, we could open those up to non-conference registrants and charge them a fee and position that as a la carte opportunities. So if you couldn't make conference, we're sorry to hear that. We hope you can be with us next year. But here's a way that you can experience part of what conference, really looked like. So that is how that business model, all that stuff kind of came together. And then let me go here. So then quickly here on how that happened, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Amy and talk about the conference experience. But from a resource standpoint, I say the short version is there are 4 applications required, and you'll notice that GoToWebinar is listed twice because we had to use it for 2 different steps. But basically, GoToWebinar we already had as part of our webinar platform. So for doing everyday non-conference things, so we already had the license for that. Hopin we've covered, and then Hopin requires that you engage YouTube to be able to offer your pre-recorded sessions, and then we flipped it back into going to webinar, really because that enabled us to track the signups, whether they were free or to conference registrants or paid a la carte to non-conference registrants or non-members, whoever wants to. And we needed to be able to track, did they actually show up? So we all know that there's people who think that they're going to get a CEU just because they paid us the money. So we had to be able to track that and make a full commitment to national that we were doing the same thing. And then we talked about the personnel that's required. I will tell you that it was really extremely critical that you have 3 dedicated people, in our case, because we had 3 sessions per window. But however many contemporaneous sessions you're having, you need to have a dedicated person for that. You also need to have apparently a 4th internet backup. Because like in my example, I was one of the presenters. I'm sharing my screen and I'm showing the pre-recording, and not only do I have a regular Wi-Fi, but I had a hotspot backup, and then I had a hardwire backup. All of them failed. So that was luckily at the tail end of the 2nd day. But that is something that we learned, is that there are some things that you can't predict, but we had presenters who stepped into the breach and it worked out great, and people thought that they were really good sports. So that worked out wonderful as well. So that is how the, kind of the sausage is made, and we'll get to maybe an opportunity later to cover that. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy and talk about what did the conference actually look like when people joined it. Amy?
Okay, so what you are looking at on the screen is the reception page for our conference hosted in Hopin. And so this is what all events hosted in Hopin will look like when you enter them. You receive a link the day before the conference, and then you receive it again about an hour before the conference starts. So when you enter the event, this is what it looks like. And I'll just walk you through a couple of like the main features. You can see along the left side of the screen, there's a few different areas. That little circle, feathery circle looking thing, that's the Hopin logo. And when you click it, it takes you back to your personal Hopin dashboard. But under that are the actual event features. So you can see currently we're on the reception page, that little house. Under that is the stage area. That's the main stage. Under that is the sessions. And so that's what you would click on to at the designated time for the breakout sessions. Under that is networking, a really interesting feature that Hopin really loves. We didn't really get to utilize it as much as I think we thought we could have, but I'm happy to explain that later to anybody who's interested. And then under that is the expo. So anytime it's time to go to one of the areas, that's where you would click on. To the right of that, you're going to see our conference graphic, the Socially Savvy, Simply Smart, and that remains there in the reception for the entirety of the event. And under that, you'll just see the title of the event. And to the right of that title of the event, you'll see time left. And so that's just an indicator of how much time is left in that particular event. And so under that, it says what's happening now. So if anything is going on live, you would see it appear there. And then right under that, you can't see it, but it's a full schedule of what's happening during the entire event. And as items expire on the calendar, that disappears. So it's really everything remaining in the event, but it gives you a full schedule, the time, the title of what's happening, and then the area that it's happening in, which is those areas on the left that I just talked about. To the right of that, you can see there's a little green dot, and it shows you how many people are live in the event at the time. There's a little bell that gives you notifications from Hopin. The little mail envelope is when somebody sends you a direct message or invites you to a private video call, and then a place where you can, that little icon with my picture is where you can edit your account info. Under that is the full event chat, and you can see this was just a screen capture from our live event, so you can see some of the stuff that we had going on. As an organizer, you can pin a chat message, and so that was a really great option for us to, and you can only pin one at a time. So whenever we had something new that we wanted everyone to see and we didn't want it to get lost in the event chat, we would just pin that message. And then next to that is polls, and that's where we as the organizers could just engage our audience. We could ask questions throughout. One of the questions that we got great response from was we had our Legislative Action Committee chair who was giving the Friday morning welcome address and a LAC update. And so in advance of his presentation, I just put up a poll question. Have you ever heard of the Legislative Action Committee? And gave options to answer it of, no, I've never heard of it. I think I've heard of it. Yes, I've heard of it. Yes, I've heard of it. And I'm an active donor. And that gave us a really great capture of just information from our members and the people attending conference. So we really could utilize that in a way that helped us feel like we were getting information from them and engaging them in some sort of way with our conference and with the organization as a whole. And then next to that is people. And so when you click on that people tab, it actually gives you a list of everybody who is registered for the conference. And you can click on someone's name and shoot them a direct message, or you can invite them to a private video call, which would take you to just like your own private meeting room, just like we're on Zoom right now, just the two of you. So that was a really cool feature that I think people wound up using a lot, because it's just like regular conference. You want to meet up with your friends and you want to say hi, and you want to do it face to face. You don't want to just have to chat each other and type. And that was actually our chapter president made a great point about that in her welcome message, that she always looks forward to seeing one particular person at conference, and she was, you know, bummed she wasn't going to get to this year, because that's the only chance she really gets to see her. And so they had planned to meet up in one of the private chat rooms so that they could catch up and talk one-on-one, just like they could in person. So that's sort of the gist of the reception page and the different areas of the Hop-In event.
There we go. Okay, so we want to veer off a little bit now and do a little bit deeper dive into the expo angle. And that did require maybe some less deep thought about the business model, but we had to think about the same way, what were their expectations? And that varied very widely. The degree of technological sophistication among our business partners could not have varied more widely. It's not possible to have more space between our most savvy and our least savvy. And what their expectations were, especially some of the ones who were annual supporting partners, because they were getting freebies or discounted booths as part of their annual sponsorship package. We needed to maintain the integrity of their expectation on that return. And so what we actually had told the board is that, we assume that we're going to get, maybe half the participation, and that's about exactly what we got. We actually got more exhibitor personnel participating than a typical year, because that part was free. So Hop-In really showed us the importance of thinking through the face-to-face angle with all its good and bad. But Amy and I were just talking yesterday, we would never consider some of the models that are out there that do not include the face-to-face. And she'll talk a little bit more about that. But we found, though, that exhibitors did assume that was going to be part of it when we would talk to them. We assumed it was kind of going to be Zoomy. So people are now used to face-to-face, but some of the products that are out there do not have it. In fact, the ASAE event earlier this week did not have the face-to-face. They had some other bells and whistles, but not that. So from the business model standpoint, we were able to say to the exhibitors that you are going to pay the base price. You're not going to pay any of the typical add-ons. You're not going to have to pay for your additional people on Thursday, your additional people on Friday. You're not going to be buying drinks for the managers. No travel expenses. You're not going to have to pay for some of the other smaller markups. No, some of those things. So normally, of course, they still did their prizes, which was a critical piece. But they have the bingo card where managers come and run and want to get the bingo card punched, and then the exhibitors would pay extra for that. We just made it be very clean. All you have to do is just pay the base booth price and show up. That turned out to be less of an easy requirement than we had thought, because we meant show up not just day of, but show up for some of the dry runs. And we had some exhibitors who absolutely embraced it and loved it, and really just made so much out of it. And we have other ones who chose not to show up even on conference day, paid us the money and didn't show up. Now, that is so short-sighted, I can't even begin to think about it from their standpoint. But now we have a challenge, because now next year we have to think about, all right, or whenever other things come up. So that would be something that, if I was going to say there's a continuing thread on what was a constant struggle, was getting exhibitors to think about this event before it. And it's kind of like, how they run in with their little hand truck for an expo, and somebody has stopped off at Target or wherever and bought a gift basket or something on the way in. They didn't give any thought. They haven't thought about who's even going to be there. So all the things that cause exhibitors to maybe have a weak presence in person cause them to have an even weaker presence here, and vice versa. So the ones who do a great job and do a lot of planning and thinking about how to make the most of their live in-person exhibit time did great. They even had an extra, I think, bonus for that, because people who were accustomed to being able to go to see Karen or Emily or Kelly and you know, in their expo booth in other years, well, they made an effort to go see those people in their booth this year. So that paid off. So all the good and bad of in-person was just kind of amplified here. So, but that's how we kind of did the business model. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to talk a little bit more about the expo experience itself.
So you are looking at right now a screenshot of what it looks like to be inside of an expo booth. And essentially, like I said earlier, it works a lot like a Zoom does. You all kind of enter into this one room together. You all have your little square that you're in, and I'll walk through a little bit of just the specifics of how it worked to go into a booth in our actual event. So you can see these two ladies in blue are both representatives of US Lawns in Charlotte, and they were manning their booth. And you can see sort of down at the bottom left, it says moderation panel. When somebody comes to enter your booth, they have to click on share audio and video. And so when they do that, that little moderation panel pops up with that person's name. And one of the moderators of the booth, which are the two representatives for the company, has to click on their name. And as soon as they click on their name, it lets the person enter into the booth. And so to the right of that, you can see earlier I showed you there's like a chat, polls, and people tab. When you're in a booth, it adds a booth tab, and that's where you'll find information about that company. So it has their name, has their tagline, it has a few sentences about who they are. And we all know that the giveaways are like, you know, the bread and butter of people's booths. Everybody wants to enter the giveaways for the Visa gift card or the new AirPods or whatever people are giving away. So Hopin has a feature that's called event offer. And a lot of times this is, I think their description of it was more for like, oh, 10% off of your services. All you have to do is click this button. So we encouraged our, because most of our vendors don't do stuff like that. So we encouraged them to use that button instead to do their giveaways. So for instance, US Lawns was giving away a Yeti cooler. So that's what they put in their event offer. And down below that, this blue button that you can sort of see the top of, it says enter me to win, and visitors would click that button and it would automatically generate an email to the contact person for this booth. And so they would collect those emails. They could do their drawings from it. But also when they clicked that, it generated their name into a list that we could grab for them at the end. So we could compile an entire list for each exhibitor that has the names and email addresses and company of everybody who visited that booth and clicked that button. So it really, I can't say enough about how important it was for us to have this interactive face-to-face. That is what an expo is about. It's about talking with people and not just you know, reading about them and then chatting with them. That's better than nothing, certainly, but we just could not imagine hosting a really successful expo without that face-to-face piece of it. So we felt so confident and excited, and you can see these guys did a really good job. I think in this screenshot, we were actually like singing along. Mackenzie's holding up her phone. We were all singing along to a song that she was playing in her booth and just having a good time. And so there were some really creative exhibitors. There were some exhibitors, I'm not kidding, they must have, they practiced their expo booth no less than 10 times. Like I must have done 20 test runs with different groups of exhibitors, and they were at almost every single one of them. So the ones that prepared well, you could definitely tell. And so this is another screenshot of another booth, and this booth had a very successful expo because they did a trivia game in there. So they ran several rounds of trivia, and every time they did, they would pop over to the full event chat and just say, hey, we're getting ready to start our next round of trivia in the Leaf and Limb booth at 2 o'clock. We hope you'll join us. And they got a great amount of people to join them. You can actually see above the guy with the glasses on, you can see where it says 4 out of 10. And then next to that, there's a little eye that says, I think it says 12. And so this is a really interesting thing that Hopin lets you do. So 4 out of 10 means that there are currently 4 squares out of the 10 total allowed in the booth. 4 of them are occupied out of the 10 that are allowed. But you can look next to that and see that there's actually 12 people watching. So when they did their trivia game, they wanted to make sure that as many people could participate as possible, but they didn't allow them into the booth during that time. They just let them watch. And so you can see when people stop by your booth, maybe they haven't elected to share their audio and video yet. So you might have more people watching than are actually participating in the booth. So that's just kind of an interesting thing to note about the platform, that it allows you to do that. So this is going to be, there's a lot to talk about here when preparing your exhibitors for an online expo. It is weird in a lot of ways. It's hard, you know, you can't get past that part of it, but you can do a lot of things to help prepare your exhibitors to get them more comfortable with the idea. And you can see some of those things listed here. The steps that we took to get them really comfortable were obviously myself and Leslie doing a lot of the legwork in figuring out how it runs. Leslie and I did some test runs on our own first. And then I recorded actually a demo of going through a live event for the exhibitors. I let them watch that live with me and walk them through it, but then I also sent the demo to them so they could share it with their teams and do all of that kind of stuff. And then we just started doing test runs with them. We did a lot of test runs to get them comfortable with entering their booth, using the features. I definitely recommend having, if you're going to have a successful booth, it's great to have a couple of people in it. And that way it allows people to take breaks, but it also allows the conversation to flow a little bit better. When somebody comes in a booth, you know, if the two of you are talking, it's more inviting than coming into a booth where somebody's just sitting there, you know, staring straight faced at you like I am right now. Let's see, some of the other great things were just getting people to advertise what their giveaway was. People are really interested in the giveaways, and the more exciting they were, the more successful their booths seemed to be. We saw a lot of people who were interested in joining booths that had, you know, people are working from home. They had their pets on camera with them, or their kids were sitting in their lap. We had somebody, one of our exhibitors had just had he and his wife had a baby a couple weeks earlier, and he was introducing everybody to his newborn in his booth. So just some fun, you know, being in person, it's all about just catching up on life and what's been going on since you saw him last year. In addition to obviously talking about, you know, new things going on with your business and offerings that you have. But we felt like the people who were the most personable and really sort of connected and on a personal level definitely had a successful time in their expo booth.
Well, am I unmuted now? There we go.
You are.
So wanted to show you just some quick snapshots of things that, some words that didn't come out of Amy's and my mouth because we're tired of hearing each other talk or hearing ourselves talk. So just wanted to show you a couple things that, what the exhibitors actually said in their words. And so here, this was actually, the first thing I'm gonna show you is what the attendees said about the expo. So we asked the attendees, the managers, what they thought. And so even though we did have some frustrations, by and large, the the attendees really enjoyed it. And you can see from the second bullet here that they recognize, the managers recognize that, look, you get out of it what you put into it. And some of these exhibitors were just not present for us. So they get it, we didn't have to overly explain that. And then here, I'm going to be quiet a minute and let you see some of the comments that we got back from the actual exhibitors of the things that they had to say. A little bit more. And I will tell you, this was big. If you can see my cursor, this is an example of, I'm pointing to, we would have preferred for those visiting without sharing their camera to be identified. Hopin, by design, allows people to lurk in the aisle, and Amy touched on that a little bit, but that was the single biggest frustration that we got from exhibitors. And Hopin, at least at this point, says that is not something that they're planning to change. Because they wanted to allow the idea of people lurking in the aisle and hanging out in the aisle, just like you would at an actual exhibit, so that you might be able to see Kelly in the booth and listen to her, but without walking in the booth and showing your badge. The flip side of that, according to the exhibitors, which we understand, is that, yeah, but we don't know who's there, and it might be our competitor. And so that is something that I feel that I know I have pushed that feedback to Hopin a lot. And so they have just surpassed 1 million users. And so maybe if enough of those 1 million users are pushing back and saying the same thing, that might change. But that's an example of where they tried uber hard to mimic an actual in-person event, and that's how it kind of came about for them. So then this is what the actual exhibiting teams said about their experience. And then we asked them about how did they like the expo compared to their expectations. One was your actual experience, and then this one is asking the attendees. Again, not just did you have a good experience, which we already looked at, but how did it compare to your expectations? So the attendees, it surpassed the expectations for them as well. So that was a positive. And so then I'm just going to show you a few more closing slides about the attendees' thoughts about it. We saw a little bit of this earlier about how they rated their overall conference experience, but we also asked them, the attendees, the managers, how did you rate it compared to your expectations? And what we really liked is, honestly, I threw that blew my expectations choice in there, thinking, just to kind of have an extreme, but to get 40% of our managers saying it blew them away. Instead of even better than I expected, that kind of blew us away. So we were very, very pleased about that. Here, I just did a list of some critical success factors, and with apologies to Emily and Karen and Kelly, I forgot that we actually have another CAI event at 3 o'clock today. So I think we can probably see that in a recording, but I don't think it'll be the same thing. So we'll come back to that after these last couple of slides and see how you guys want to handle that. But here, I just kind of listed some things that we learned, that recording the demos was critical. Amy did that, and we were made people feel like they knew what to expect before the day of, and that was great. Our speaker support was huge. They had to commit to doing the original recording, then showing up for conference day, and then showing up for the live launch day. So there was 3 times that they had to show up for us. That was huge. But they were all very, very supportive of that. We already talked about exhibitor presence, and you need somebody to talk to the exhibitors about exhibitor etiquette. And then the day of, we were not prepared for people who showed up early that morning, and neither were the exhibitors, because we didn't tell them to be prepared for that. We had no idea people would sign on 4 hours in advance. They don't have enough to do. So we were surprised. It was very critical that we had some social monitors during the day to keep the exhibitors from interrupting the sessions with "come by my booth for a prize." things like that. So interactivity was huge. We were very, very pleasantly surprised at the volume of chats, and we could download all that. So Amy and I've had a chance to look at it. You can download the chat conversation from within a session. You can download the chat conversation from the whole event or from within any booth. So that was really, really helpful. So those are just some of the lessons that we learned. And then really what was the best outcome of all for us, the money was great and some of the positive feedback about the experience was great. But this is what really was very gratifying to us, is that the members were saying, you tried to do something for us, and whether it worked out well or not, this is what spoke to them, is that the chapter really tried to deliver some online learning to them, tried to deliver the fun, and tried to deliver the connectivity in the middle of all this crazy stuff that's going on. So our hope is that it helped foster that sense of belonging, that CAI is my home. And whether I'm there or not, or whether I'm seeing people, that's where I belong. And so I'm going to stick around. So I just thought it'd be nice to conclude this presentation with showing that in some of their own words, that they felt like that CAI was there for them.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Amy. You guys did an amazing job, and it sounds like, I mean, I've heard already from people that attended. They were emailing us at headquarters saying what an amazing experience it was. So congratulations to you guys. But we will open it up to your questions. You can either unmute yourself or post them in the chat. Carice asked in the chat, Amy, that she missed the first 3 minutes. What was your total cost?
The total cost was, with software, was about $1,000. The total cost to Amy's and my sanity was harder to quantify.
Where do you get all of your speakers? You have 12 sessions. So do you just go within your chapter, or do you use CAI's Speakers Bureau? Do you pay for them? Are they free?
On a regular year, we would pay for a keynote. And we have on occasion paid stipend level fees for speakers, but by and large, it is our own business partner pool. That has a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. But this year it was certainly positives because it was really easy to pull. The speakers the topics had actually already been identified when we pulled the plug and pivoted. So that is not something that we had to deal with. We just then had to make sure that the presenters who had already agreed to participate in conference were willing to handle it differently.
What was the charge to attend for managers and homeowners?
Typically, we have 4 price points. One is for the full conference, meaning the Thursday and Friday, and then we have a member, non-member price, and we have a Friday only price, which is the education only, member and non-member. So what we looked at was the education only price for members. Last year was it was budgeted for $120 this year. And so we didn't want to go below that. We actually ended up increasing that price. So that went to $139 for members and $199 for non-members. So it was right in the same general territory that they had been paying before. It was a little bit more, but we felt like you're paying a little bit more and we're delivering a lot more.
Right, and they got those sessions
Right.
too. They got to view all of them. Great. Leah asked, would you recommend Hopin for chapter webinars up to 200 people, or is it a platform meant for more of a virtual trade show with breakout sessions?
I would have answered that question differently a few weeks ago, but actually our chapter president-elect commented that, you know, this would work not just for big events, but this would actually work for a lunch and learn type of events, what we used to call lunch and learn, because at those events we would have, you know, half a dozen sponsors who would have their little display tables, little tabletop, and have their elevator speech at the front of the room. And so we were kind of thinking, well, how are we going to do sponsorships for our a la carte events going forward? And he said, well, if you continue to use Hopin, then you can have like a little mini MINI expo, and you can still allow the sponsors the chance to have some face-to-face time, and then you can maintain all that good stuff. And so because we're only paying $99 a month for Hopin on a maintenance basis until we need it again for a bigger event, that is actually I think a great idea.
Awesome.
Leslie, just to confirm, with the license with Happen, you can do multiple events. It's not just for one event only.
Yeah, you can host as many events as your heart desires.
Did you have any sponsors? And if so, how did you transfer their benefits over to the virtual format?
Yes, we did, but quite honestly, on the fast track, that was kind of the last piece that we really turned our focus to, because we didn't really, well, first of all, because the exhibitor focus took so much more of our time than we anticipated. Second of all, we just didn't have the time to dream up really cool sponsorship ideas, and like we would at a normal conference. And so what we ended up with was having session sponsors. And so they would, have some play on the front end of the session recording. And so Amy did all that editing herself and put that front end. And then we would have the speaker thank the company, the sponsoring company, verbally. And then of course they had the same thing on the on-demand piece. So they get that presence again, that extended presence. So we had we had sold 6 out of the 12 sessions had sponsorships. And we just flat out sold that outright, because we do not offer conference sponsorships as part of your annual sponsor supporting pack or annual supporting partner package. What we do offer is discounted or free booths. And so we just maintain that same business model. If you were at the top level, you still got your free booth, still got your discount, etc.
How many booths were sold, and what was the cost if not a sponsor?
Again, sponsorship didn't play other than if you were annual sponsor, and so those were $715 for a member, and I want to say $999, so around $1,000 for a non-member company, and that's the normal price.
That's what you normally charge
Yeah.
any given year. Okay.
They typically have to pay extra for their extra people, so they ended up really saving a good bit of money.
How many total booths did you have?
We had 37.
37.
And that's about half.
About half, yeah.
Thank you guys for coming on. We really appreciate it.
If you have any questions, please contact a member of the Chapter Relations team or email chapterlearning@caionline.org.